The old Mustang plants his hooves in the snow and will not take another step. I pull the lead rope. He locks his neck and pins his ears flat. The wind cuts sideways through the pass. Snow blinds me. I lean into him and try to coax him forward. Nothing. He scrapes the ice with his front hoof. Once, twice, a third time. Hard. He has never done this in 20 years on the trail. I drop the rope and kneel beside him. The ice is gray and old. There is something black under it. Something shaped wrong for the mountain. I claw at it with my gloved hands. My breath comes short. The wind howls down the cut like a warning. What kind of horse refuses a mountain pass at dusk in a Wyoming blizzard? Stay with me on this one. You ride long enough in country like this, and you learn to listen to the animal under you. He knows things you do not. He smells trouble a mile off. The old Mustang has carried me out of a flash flood on the Powder River. He has stood quiet when a sow grizzly walked past us with 2 cubs at her flank. That is the kind of horse he is. Steady, sound, stubborn only when it counts. Which is why I knew the second he planted his feet halfway up that frozen pass that something was wrong. Bad wrong. I'm a cattle hand by trade. 41 years old. Born in a sod house in Nebraska. Lost my mother to the fever. Lost my father to a Texas Ranger's bullet the year I turned 15. I drifted north after that. By the spring of 1884, I was running line for an outfit east of the Bighorns. Cold work. Lonely work. The kind of work a man takes when he is trying to forget something. That winter came down hard. The first snow fell in October and never melted. By the middle of January, the drifts were chest deep and the rivers were locked solid. I was sent out on the 2nd of February with a packhorse load of supplies for an old line shack on the western slope. 2 days of riding. Bring back word on the herd that wintered up there. I should have turned around the first morning. The sky to the north went the color of dirty iron. The wind shifted. The old Mustang lifted his head and snorted into the cold. But I had a job and I had pride. So I rode on. By the second afternoon, I was at the foot of the pass. A narrow cut between 2 ridges of black rock. Locals called it the Frozen Pass. Some called it the Trooper's Cut. I did not yet know either reason. I rested the horses in the timber for an hour. Then I tightened the cinches and started up. The packhorse balked once. The old Mustang climbed without complaint. He had been on this pass before with a former owner. I trusted him to find the safe footing. And he did. For a while. We were maybe halfway through the cut when he stopped. I clicked my tongue. Nothing. I touched my heels to him. Nothing. I dismounted and walked to his head, and he looked at me with one wide brown eye, and he would not move. The wind picked up. I felt the temperature drop in a single minute the way it can drop in these mountains. 20 degrees gone like a candle snuffed. And still the old horse would not move. That was when he started to scrape. Right hoof. Once. He pawed at the ice. Then again. Harder. Now here's the thing. A horse paws when he is hungry. He paws when he smells water under frozen ground. But this was none of those. This was deliberate. This was a horse trying to tell me something. I knelt down. I brushed the snow off the patch he was scraping. The ice underneath was old. Layered. But under that layered ice there was a shape. Dark. Squared off. Not stone. Not wood. Leather maybe. Frozen hard. I drew the small belt knife from my coat and started to chip. Slow at first. Then faster. Somewhere far down the slope, I heard a single rifle shot crack across the timber, and I froze. The shot did not repeat. Could have been a hunter. Could have been the cold popping a tree limb. I went back to chipping. It took me near 20 minutes to break through. My hands were numb. My knees were soaked through with snow. But I pulled it loose at last. What I held in my hands when I sat back on my heels stopped my breath cold. A cavalry saddlebag. The leather black with age and frost, but the brass buckles still solid. And stamped right into the flap I could see the seal. A shield. Crossed sabers. The number 7 worked in beneath them. The 7th Cavalry. The same regiment that had ridden out under Custer on the Little Bighorn 8 summers before. The same regiment that had buried so many of its dead in unmarked ground across the high country. I had handled enough army gear in my time to know real from fake. This was real, and it had been here a long time. I looked up at the old Mustang. He was watching me. His ears were forward. His breath made twin plumes in the air. He had carried me to this exact patch of ground on purpose. He had refused to leave it. Because he had known. Somehow, he had known. I unbuckled the flap with shaking hands. Inside the saddlebag there were 3 things. The first was a small oilcloth bundle tied with rawhide. The second was a sealed army payroll satchel of the kind they used to carry coin between forts. Heavy, cold, stamped with a different seal. United States Army Quartermaster. Department of the Platte. The third thing was a hand. A gloved hand. Frozen solid. Clutching a folded square of yellowed paper. Just the hand. Severed cleanly at the wrist by what must have been a saber strike a long time ago. Wrapped around the paper like a man's last act on this earth had been to hide what he was holding. I sat back. The wind hit me full in the face. I did not feel it. I felt my own heart slamming against my ribs. The light was bleeding out of the sky. I had maybe an hour before dark. And I was sitting on a frozen pass in the middle of nowhere with a dead trooper's hand and an army payroll and a folded paper that someone had died to keep hidden. I should have buried it again. That is the truth. A wiser man. A colder man. Believe me, I have thought about that choice every night since. But I did not bury it again. I wrapped the hand in my saddle blanket. I tied the payroll satchel to the back of the packhorse. I slid the oilcloth bundle into my own coat. And I worked the folded paper free of those frozen fingers and tucked it inside my shirt against my skin where the heat of my body could thaw it. Then I stood up. I picked up the lead rope. The old Mustang stepped forward without a sound. The whole rest of the pass, he walked beside me as quiet as a shadow. Like the job he had come to do was done. By the time we cleared the top of the cut, the snow was coming sideways, and the world was nothing but white. I told myself, riding down the back slope, that the worst of it was behind me. I told myself that for nearly an hour. I was wrong. I made camp in a stand of stunted spruce a mile below the pass. The wind broke against the trees and gave me a pocket of stillness. I built a fire small and hot. I picketed both horses close. The old Mustang stood facing back up the trail, with his ears working the wind. I melted snow in a tin cup. I drank coffee black. I did not feel hungry. I felt cold in a way that had nothing to do with weather. I unwrapped the saddle blanket first and looked at the hand again in the firelight. The glove was cavalry issue. Yellow stitch cuff. Worn smooth at the trigger finger. He had been a young man. The cut across the wrist was clean. One stroke. Someone had taken his hand off in a single swing while he was still gripping that paper. Then I unfolded the paper. It cracked along the creases. I worked it open against my knee. It was a map, hand-drawn in brown ink. The pass I had just crossed was marked at the top of the page with a small cross and the word payroll. Below it, a trail descended along a creek I knew. The creek ran south toward a settlement called Camp Ruin. I had heard of Camp Ruin. It had been a stage stop and a wood-cutting camp and a small army garrison until the winter of 1876, when the whole place had emptied out almost overnight. Some said cholera. Some said deserters. Some said the army had ordered it abandoned for reasons they never explained. No one lived there now. But what made me sit forward was not the map alone. It was the names written in the margin. 6 names. 5 of them crossed out in heavy black ink. One name was not crossed out. Hardin. Just that. One word. With an arrow drawn from it to small square below Camp Ruin labeled officers' quarters. And below the names, a line of writing in a different hand. Smaller. Hurried. It said this: "They mean to keep it. If I do not return, the man with the deed is the one who killed me." Deed. Not just payroll. A deed. That was when I started to put it together. A cavalry payroll detail ambushed in the pass in the deep winter of some year I could not yet place. One trooper survives long enough to scratch a map and a warning and to hide the bag under the ice. The others ride down the back slope with the money and with whatever deed they had taken. Down to Camp Ruin. And then the camp empties out. And the trooper waits in the pass for someone to find him. For 8 winters, I looked at the old Mustang. He was looking back at me. I said, out loud, "Old man, you did not stop in that pass by accident, did you?" He blew out a long breath and he turned his head and he looked back up the trail toward the pass. Not at me. At the pass. And in the way of a horse who has just told you something you needed to know, he was finished talking. That was when I heard it. From up the trail. The sound of shod hooves on hard snow. More than 1. 3 at least. Maybe 4. Moving slow. Searching. The old Mustang did not snort. He did not whinny. He stood as still as a stone. The packhorse lifted his head, and the old Mustang stepped sideways in front of him and gave him a soft butt with his shoulder. The packhorse settled. The hoofbeats came on. I kicked snow over the fire in one motion. The flames went black. I drew the Colt out of the holster on my hip and cocked it slow to muffle the click. I crouched low behind the picket line. The hoofbeats were maybe 200 yards out. They had not yet seen the smoke. The wind was carrying it the other way. The riders came on. They passed within 50 yards of the spruce stand. 4 men. Long coats. Wide hats. 2 of them carried rifles in scabbards. One carried what looked like a long-barreled shotgun across his pommel. They did not call out. They did not light a lantern. They rode quiet and they rode searching, and they were moving toward Camp Ruin. Toward the man named Hardin. The same trail I would have to take in the morning. They vanished into the snow. I let out the breath I had been holding. The mountain went quiet. And in that quiet I heard one more thing. From up the trail. Behind me. Not the 4 riders. Something else. A single shod hoof. 1 step. Then nothing. As if a 5th horse had stopped and was now standing still and listening. I did not move. The minute stretched. The next step did not come. The wind picked up again and covered everything. I stayed crouched by the cold fire for another half hour with the Colt in my fist. Nothing more moved. Nothing more spoke. The night came down full. I did not sleep. So I sat. And I listened. And the cold deepened. And nothing else happened. For a while. That was the false calm. And I should have known better than to trust it. Around 3 in the morning, the wind shifted. The old Mustang lifted his head. I came up off the spruce trunk with the Colt already in my hand. I did not hear hoofbeats this time. I heard boots. 2 pair. Coming down through the trees from above. Slow. Quiet. Picking their footing. The kind of slow that means a man does not want to be heard. The kind of quiet that means he means to kill you. I rolled sideways out of the picket line. I came up behind a fallen log 6 feet from the cold fire. I steadied the Colt across the log. The first man came into the clearing. A shape against the snow. Tall. Coat down past his knees. Rifle held across his belly. He stopped at the edge of the dead fire. He did not call out. He turned his head one way, then the other. He took one step toward the picket line. The old Mustang screamed. I will never forget that sound. A horse can scream in a way that no man can describe to another man. It is half whinny and half something older. He screamed and reared on the picket, and came down with both front hooves on the snow with a crash that shook the spruce limbs. The man with the rifle jumped backward. He tripped over the picket peg. He went down on his back. His rifle went off into the air. The second man behind him swung his rifle up, but he did not have a target because he could not see me behind the log. I shot him in the chest. One round. The Colt jumped in my hand. He went down without a sound. The first man rolled sideways and came up, and I shot him through the shoulder. He dropped his rifle. He cursed. He scrambled up the slope and was gone into the timber. I did not chase him. When I stood up, the second man was dead in the snow. I rolled him over. He was older than I expected. Grayer. His coat was good wool. His boots were new. Under the coat he wore a vest with a tarnished pin on it. A small five-pointed star. The kind a deputy wears. Or the kind someone can buy from a tinker who knew what to file the back off of. He carried 2 letters in an inside pocket, both addressed in the same neat hand, both addressed to a man at Camp Ruin. Mr. R. Hardin, Office of the Land Agent. Land Agent. Not soldier. Not officer. Land Agent. The piece I had been missing slid into place with a small sick click. The payroll detail had not been ambushed by road agents. It had been ambushed by their own. By men who knew the route because they had set it. By a land agent who needed the army gone from a piece of ground he wanted for himself. The deed in the dead trooper's hand was not a payroll voucher. It was the title to that ground. The 5 names crossed out on my map were the men who had ridden down off the pass 8 winters before with the money and the deed and the blood of one trooper on their saber. And one name not crossed out. Hardin, the man who had survived. The man who had stayed at Camp Ruin. The man who had spent 8 years making sure no one would ever ride back up to that pass. If you're still with me, hit that subscribe button. It tells me you want the rest of these. The right thing would have been to ride out of those mountains a different way. Cut east. Send a wire to Fort McKinney. Let the Army handle Hardin. The honest answer is that I did not trust the Army to come back for a payroll they had written off as lost. I did not trust the territorial law to ride against a registered land agent. 8 years had already passed, and the only reason any of it had come back to the light was that an old horse with bad knees had decided to plant his hooves on 1 square yard of mountain. So I rode down. I buried the dead man in the snow at the edge of the spruce stand. I marked the place with a cairn of stones. I tied the saddle blanket bundle behind my saddle. I lashed the Army payroll tighter to the packhorse. I mounted up. The old Mustang turned south down the trail without being asked. He knew where we were going. We rode through the gray dawn. The wind held off. The trees thinned out by mid-morning, and I could see the bottoms below us. Smoke from a single chimney rose through the cold air. Camp Ruin. 1 chimney out of 40. 1 fire in a town that had been emptied 8 winters before. Hardin's chimney. Hardin's fire. We came down out of the timber at the edge of what had been the parade ground. The barracks stood in 2 long rows. Their roofs sagged. The flagpole was still up, but the rope was gone. The cross on the chapel had fallen. The well in the center had been filled in with stones. Camp Ruin was a dead place wearing the bones of a town. The chimney that smoked was at the far end. The largest building. The officers' quarters from the map. A solid log structure with a small porch and a single window. A horse stood saddled and tied at the rail. A good horse. Black. Better tack than a frontier man would carry. The rider was inside. The land agent was inside. Hardin was inside. Waiting. I did not ride straight in. I tied my horses in the trees 100 yards off. I took the Colt and my Winchester. I worked through the parade ground in the cover of the empty buildings. Snow muffled my boots. I came up to the back of the officers' quarters and listened at the chinking. Inside I could hear two voices. One older, calm, used to giving orders. One younger, out of breath. The wounded man from the spruce stand had made it down ahead of me. He was telling Hardin what had happened. The land agent was telling him to shut up and let him think. I crept around to the side window. I waited until the older voice was facing the fire. I looked in. Hardin was a tall man. Iron gray hair. Thin mouth. Boots polished even out here. He stood by a desk with a long ledger open on it. The wounded man sat in a chair, holding a cloth to his shoulder. A pistol lay on top of the open ledger. The ledger pages were thick with deed numbers and section lines, and a column of names. I could see 2 of those names from the window. They were on my map. They were 2 of the 5 names crossed out. Hardin had not been hiding the deed all these years. He had been working it, selling pieces of it, building a county out of stolen ground, while the man whose hand had clutched the original deed lay frozen in a pass above his head. I had seen enough. I came around the front slow with the Winchester up. I called out one time before I came in. I said, "Hardin, step away from the desk. Hands where I can see them." The door opened. Hardin stood in the doorway in his polished boots and his good wool coat, and he looked at me without surprise. Like he had been waiting for me longer than the morning. Like he had been waiting for me for 8 years. He said, "You must be the one the old man brought down off the pass." I did not answer. I kept the Winchester level on the 3rd button of his coat. He looked past me at the old Mustang, standing quiet 100 yards off. He said, "That is a damn good horse." I said, "I know." He said, "I will pay you for it. Name your price." I said, "He is not for sale." He said, "Everything is for sale." I said, "Not this morning." The wounded man inside made a move toward a rifle leaning by the desk. I shot the rifle off the wall over his head, and the round took out the window and he went still. Hardin did not flinch. He said, "There are 6 men in this town this morning. You have seen 2. There are 4 more." I said, "Then we should hurry this up." Then I told him exactly what I would do. I would ride down to the rail line. I would wire the marshal at Cheyenne. I would wire the army post at McKinney. I would wire the editor of the Cheyenne Daily Leader. I would name him. I would name the camp. I would name the deed. I would tell them where to find the trooper. I would do all of it before nightfall. His face did not change, but his hands did. The right hand drifted half an inch toward the inside of his coat. The Winchester was already lined on him. I said, "Don't." He stopped. Then the old Mustang screamed again from the trees 100 yards off. Long, sharp, a warning. I dropped to one knee on the porch, and I swung the Winchester to the east end of the parade ground, and the first of the 4 returning riders came around the corner of the barracks with his pistol already drawn. I shot him out of the saddle. The second came behind him, and I worked the lever, and I shot him through the leg, and his horse threw him sideways into the snow. The 3rd and the 4th pulled up short behind the corner of the barracks and started to back their horses. They had not expected to find me on the porch of the officers' quarters with a clean line of fire across the parade. The old Mustang had told me they were coming, and I had been ready. Hardin used the second of distraction. He went for the pistol inside his coat. I swung the Winchester back, and I shot him through the right arm at the elbow. He went down on the porch. The pistol skidded across the boards. I kicked it into the snow. I put a knee in the middle of his back. I tied his good wrist to his bad arm with a rawhide thong. The 2 riders behind the barracks lit out east across the open ground, and I let them go. Their boss was on the porch with his face in the snow. I went into the cabin. I took the ledger off the desk. I took the deed map out of my shirt, and I laid the 2 side by side. The handwriting in the column of names matched the handwriting in the warning on my map. The same hand. The trooper had been the army clerk on the payroll detail. He had been the one to copy out the deed for transport. He had recognized the names. He had known what the detail was really being used for. He had hidden a copy of the deed and his own warning under his glove the moment they were ambushed. He had paid for it with his hand and his life and 8 winters in the ice. The clerk's name was on the back of his glove in pale ink. Corporal J. Reese, 7th Cavalry. Detached to the Quartermaster, Department of the Platte. I said his name twice. I tied Hardin and the wounded man across 2 of the saddles. I gathered the rifles. I gathered the ledger. I gathered the payroll satchel, still sealed with its army stamp. I rode out of Camp Ruin at noon with 2 prisoners and 3 horses behind me, and the old Mustang under me, and a folded paper in my shirt, and a frozen hand wrapped in my saddle blanket. It took 4 days to reach Fort McKinney. Hardin tried twice to talk me out of it. I did not answer. On the 5th morning, we rode through the gate of the post. The lieutenant who came out looked at my prisoners and the army stamp on the payroll satchel and did not say a single word for a full minute. Then he sent a runner. Then a captain came out. Then a major. I told them the story from the start. When I was done, the major took off his hat and held it against his chest. He said, "Corporal Reese." I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "We lost him in the winter of '76. We never recovered the bag. We never recovered him." I said, "He has been waiting up there." The major did not answer that. He put his hat back on. I dismounted. I handed it all over. They paid the Army's bounty for the recovered payroll the following spring. It was more money than I had ever held in one hand. I used most of it to buy a small piece of ground east of the Bighorns. I put a cabin on it. I put a barn on it. I put a pasture fence around the best 40 acres for a horse to graze. Hardin went to trial in Cheyenne that summer. The ledger and the deed map put him on the gallows by the first frost. 2 of the other riders never came down out of the high country. 2 turned themselves in within the year. Corporal Reese was buried with full military honors at Fort McKinney the next August, when the ground thawed enough to take him properly. I rode down for the service. I sat at the back. The major shook my hand afterward. He said the Army owed me. I said the Army owed the horse. I meant it. The old Mustang lived another 6 years on that pasture. He never carried me into the high country again. I did not ask it of him. By the last winter of his life, his knees were too far gone for any kind of ride. I would walk him in the morning down the lane and back. He would stop sometimes and look up at the ridge to the west. The ridge that pointed back toward the Bighorns, toward the frozen pass. I would stand beside him and look with him. I do not think he ever forgot it. He went down in his sleep in the barn on a March night in 1890. I buried him myself at the top of the pasture, under a cottonwood that had grown up there crooked from the wind. I marked the place with a stone the size of a saddle. I have never told another living person what his name was. Some things a man and a horse keep between them. I am an old man myself now. I sit on the porch of that same cabin most evenings. The Bighorns are just a blue line against the western sky from here. I think about that pass more often than I should. I think about Corporal Reese and his warning written small. I think about the 4 riders in the dusk. I think about Hardin's polished boots on the porch. I think about a frozen mountain that gave it back. Most of all, I think about a thing I cannot ever fully explain. A horse stopping on a pass for no reason a man can see. A horse who had been on it once long ago, with a former owner. whose name I never asked. A horse who remembered. A horse who had a job he had not yet finished. A horse who waited 8 winters for the right rider to come up that trail in the worst storm of the season, so he could plant his hooves and refuse to leave. I do not have an answer for it. I only know that I was the man he chose. And I try to be worthy of the choosing. And on cold mornings now, when the wind comes down off the ridge, I sometimes hear it again. The sound of an old hoof scraping ice. Once, twice, a third time. Hard, as if to say, here, right here, stop and dig. So I sit a while longer on the porch. And I listen. And I am grateful for him. And I am grateful for the mountain. And I am grateful that the cold did not keep it secret. Not that winter. Not that day. Believe me when I tell you, I have left nothing out that I am free to tell. The rest belongs to the mountain, and to the cottonwood at the top of my pasture, and to a stone I cut with my own hands, and to the kind of bond between a man and a good horse that no winter can ever cover over.